All right, so for tonight's meeting, we're going to cover the project background. We're going to do a recap, or we're going to go through the project schedule, recap of some of the work we've done so far. We're going to go through the methodology we use to score the innovative transportation modes, go through the recommendations, next steps, and finally, we'll end the meeting with the question and answer session. So we request that you hold your questions until the end of the presentation, and we will address them there. Also, throughout the presentation, we've included questions to get your feedback on the recommendations. So I'll hand it off to Sam to go over how to participate through this meeting tonight.
Hi, everyone. My name is Sam, and I'm with Sam Schwartz Consulting. Like Eli mentioned, we are using Menti.com today during the presentation. This is a polling software. So if everybody could, in a separate window or browser on your computer or phone, without accidentally leaving our Zoom call today, go to www.menti.com. When you get there, you will enter code 51863156. I'm also entering the link into the chat, or you can use the QR code that you see on your screen. So just as an example here, when you go to menti.com, this is the window that you will see first. That is where you will enter the code. When you click submit, you will see whichever slide is currently being presented. So when we are on a polling slide, the question will appear in front of you on the screen. You can then answer the polling question and switch back to the Zoom call so that you can see the responses from everyone. When we go to the next poll question, if you go back to your menti.com, you will see a pop-up at the top of your screen that allows you to click go to slide to get to the next question. So we're going to do a test question right now. It's going to be right here on your screen. And again, it's going to be menti.com. You should also be able to see the code along the top of the shared window. Oh, look, it's working. So we're just going to ask you all, what do you call a sandwich on a long roll? It looks like so far sub is the most popular option. So we'll give you all a few seconds to test that out. Wow, sub is really popular. Okay. So I did do some research. Heroes are typically, or sandwiches are typically called heroes in New York City. Hoagies are from Philadelphia. A sub is, I don't remember that one. But grinders, oh, a sub is New England. And grinders are Vermont, New Hampshire, and Western and Central Massachusetts, for anyone that is curious. Okay, so we had 24 people able to access this. We have 55 participants. So folks, feel free to keep trying to get onto that site. The majority of the poll questions will take place during the second half of the presentation. I'm going to hand it right back on over to Eli.
Great, thanks, Sam. Actually, I forgot to introduce myself. I'm Elias Gooseman. I'm a senior transportation planner at the City of Jersey City in the City Planning Department. So it segues nicely into, so this study is a collaboration between the City of Jersey City and the North Jersey Transportation Planning Authority. And this study we're being helped by a consultant team made up of Sam Schwartz, Nelson Nygaard, and Connect the Dots. Right, so over the past few years, Jersey City has done a lot of planning for its transportation system, which includes studying and developing comprehensive strategies related to walking, bicycling, traffic safety, and parking. However, we found that there are still people and places in the city whose trips are not well served by existing transportation options. And this study, essentially, the main aim of it was to help fill these gaps and determine how we can fill these gaps. Also, on top of that, the city, or as a city, we also need to look to the future, and we need to plan for our projected growth. Next slide. So the overarching goal of this study is to explore innovative and emerging transportation modes, determine which can best fill the service gaps of the existing transit network, as well as expand the existing network. So we had three objectives that supported this goal. The first is to utilize equity as the foundational component to the study. So we can ensure all Jersey City residents see their story, needs, and future life in the recommendations of the study. The second is to identify the needs of the people within and around Jersey City and advance the modal options that are best suited to help communities meet their full potential. And the third is to identify the ideal mobility solutions and services to enhance user access, mobility, safety, and efficiency while closing existing transportation gaps. So as you can see, we are currently in the final stages of this study. So we are in the process of developing the final recommendations and drafting the final report, which will be released in June of this year. And now I will hand it over to Mike from Sam Schwartz to talk about the work we've done so far.
Great. Thanks, Eli. Hi, everyone. I'm Mike, and I'm with Sam Schwartz, and I was the project manager for the consultant team. So we're going to start out by just going through some more of the background of the project. For those of you who joined the earlier public meetings in January, some of this will be a repeat, but we just wanted to cover the bases for those who are maybe newer to the process. And we'll spend more of the time later getting into the actual recommendations, of course. So on the next slide, we began by looking at existing conditions, seeing what's out there. There were a few different pieces to that. Obviously, we wanted to review prior plans and research that had been done, some of which Eli showed earlier. And then we really tried to gather as much data as we could on the current transportation modes, on current travel patterns, on current access and mobility in and around Jersey City. And as part of that, we did what's called a Title VI and environmental justice analysis, which is based on federal guidelines to basically it's a lens for looking at transportation equity that includes looking at minority population and foreign-born population. We also did what's called a transit desert analysis, which is basically identifying areas that have less convenient access or are further from regular transit service, which also looked at other demographic factors like minority population, lower income population, and those with limited English proficiency. Really, we had an intentional focus on examining relative access and disparities between different groups so that we could identify areas of the greatest need and learn about the barriers that they face. And all of that helped inform our work to get deeper into evaluating different potential. I would just ask that everyone mute. Thank you. So that helped inform our work to evaluate different potential solutions and match them to the need. Next slide. So the good news, and maybe not surprising, is that when it comes to having a wide range of transportation options, Jersey City really punches above its weight. It's a very multimodal city. When we look at the existing transportation systems and ridership, we see that there are a good amount of options out there. But the bigger challenge is that not all of these options are convenient to access all over the city or to all populations, as Eli alluded to a moment ago. Or they may not serve certain kinds of connections that people are trying to make. And you can kind of see, some of that here. So this is showing pre-pandemic travel patterns within Jersey City. You can see that it has one of the highest shares of people walking, biking, and using transit to get to work in the US, which is a great starting point. One part of our analysis was looking at aggregated and anonymized cell phone location data to get a really fine-grained understanding of travel patterns. And you see that on the right, which shows the density of trips in different parts of the city, or basically trips per square mile for all modes. So you can see that Journal Square has the highest density of trips, followed by the neighborhoods along the eastern waterfront between Exchange Place, Newport Center, and the retail areas north of Newport Center, as well as downtown around the Grove Street PATH station. This map shows kind of a more detailed look at where some of those key connections are, where we see kind of origins and destinations of trips, and some of those major kind of corridors that people are traveling. So again, we see that areas of high activity that stand out are between the waterfront, Newport and Paulus Hook, between downtown and those waterfront neighborhoods, and between Journal Square and the surrounding neighborhoods. So we use this kind of data to identify those what we call origin and destination pairs with significant demand, but that some of which may not be well served by existing transit options. So what did we find looking at the existing conditions? There were a few key findings. One is that transit service in Jersey City runs much more frequently during the morning and evening rush hour than at other times of day or on weekends. Customers often have to wait twice as long for a train or bus outside of peak periods, and some services stop running altogether. Number two, most of Jersey City falls within a quarter mile or about a 5-minute walk of some transit service. So those are the areas in blue on this map. However, some portions of the city, particularly in the southeast and western areas, lack access to transit service. And a large portion of the city, including some of the more central areas, are more than a half a mile from frequent transit. So transit that's actually, running regularly rather than just kind of minimal transit service. Also, job and activity centers that are difficult to access include Hudson Mall, the big box retail north of Newport Center, Port Jersey Industrial Park, Liberty State Park Industrial Park, and Lincoln Park. For certain locations that lack access to path or light rail, it can take more than twice as long for people traveling on transit to complete their trip than people driving. And many of these trips originate in areas with high concentrations of those Title VI and environmental justice populations. This map summarizes the areas of Jersey City that have a relatively higher demand for transit, but are relatively less served by it. So the dark purple areas have high transit demand and low transit access. The pink areas have high demand and moderate transit access. And the light blue areas have moderate demand and low transit access. So all of those are priority areas for improving transportation options. For example, several communities within Bergen Lafayette and the Heights were identified as having high demand and need for transit, but low access to transit, including both standard and high frequency transit service. And some of these communities also include high concentrations of vulnerable populations. A combination of physical and geographic barriers also contribute to the lack of access to transit, whether it's highways or steep slopes or things like that. And a number of locations across Jersey City, particularly within the Bergen Lafayette and Journal Square areas, see high levels of biking, more than 1,000 trips a day by bike, according to the streetlight data, but lack safe infrastructure for people biking. And these areas include a bunch of roads on the city's Vision Zero high injury network. And these are areas that we'd want to prioritize for safe infrastructure. Great. So next, I'll talk a little bit about our community engagement and outreach process, of which this meeting is kind of the one of the last steps in it. If we go to the next slide, we've had a really multifaceted approach to try to hear from as many people as we can across the community. So there's different components. First, we had a technical advisory committee, which was comprised of staff from key agencies around the city and the region that provided, kind of high-level input and direction into the study, as well as information from the work that their own agencies are doing. And we had 3 meetings with them at key steps of the process. Earlier on in the process, we had interviews with kind of community leader stakeholders to get an early sort of ear to the ground about what are some of the key concerns and issues that they're aware of in their neighborhood or from their constituents that could help inform the subsequent steps in the outreach and community input process, as well as the kinds of technical things that we were looking into. We've had these virtual public meetings. The first round was actually supposed to be in person, but Omicron wave unfortunately made us change that. But we had 2 meetings in January that were pretty well attended, and then we have this meeting today. And then all of that was supplemented with digital engagement, which had a few pieces. We did a community survey. Hopefully all of you had a chance to respond to that with pretty detailed questions around how you get around and what some of your priorities and challenges are. We had an interactive map and I'll go into that in a bit more detail. And we had a project webpage with kind of a central repository of information. So our process has reached a lot of Jersey City folks. The web-based survey by itself received over 1,200 responses, and that gave us some really fine-grained information about how you get around, how folks would like to get around, the barriers that people face when choosing between different travel options. But we also, again, as Eli mentioned, equity is one of the foundational pieces, or is the foundation for the study. So we wanted to make sure that we were hearing from a representative group of Jersey City folks. And what we found is that there was some, a bit of a difference between who we heard from in the survey versus the demographics of the city as a whole. So we just wanted to make sure that we accounted for that in how we analyzed the data, and sort of, how we used it to inform recommendations, to make sure that, different groups, different communities were all heard from in an appropriate way. So you can see here that generally the respondents to the survey were less people of color, were higher income, and just a little bit owned a vehicle more than the citywide averages. And so to mitigate this, we broke the results down by demographic criteria like race and income, so that we could see how travel choices and priorities may have differed among different groups. So here you can see an example of that. You can see in this table that those with lower income were most likely to travel on foot, by bus, or on path, while those with higher incomes also walked and took the path, but generally drove more and rode the buses less. So that's, an example of the kinds of things that we took into account when we evaluated alternatives and developed recommendations. And then the map was sort of a component of the public survey where people could add location-specific concerns and ideas. You can see that we received comments really from across the city, and even from areas outside of Jersey City, with the greatest share of comments being received downtown and in Journal Square, followed by Bergen Lafayette, the Heights, and the West Side. On the map here, you can just see kind of a random selection of the kinds of comments that we received from the map, things around transit service, things around barriers, or what it's like to get around without a car, or connections between specific neighborhoods, like from the Heights to downtown, and things like that. And one thing I'll mention, I think Eli might have mentioned it, but just to reiterate, so we'll get into recommendations in a moment, and we're going to have time reserved at the end for Q&A too. So if you do have questions on some of what's being presented here, please do, kind of put a pin in them, and then we can circle back at the end. So taking everything we learned from the existing conditions analysis and the public engagement process, we basically identified a range of potential solutions, modes, technologies for transportation, and then narrowed them down and prioritized them. So first, we conducted a scan of innovative transportation modes and technologies to understand that universe of potential solutions that could be applied in Jersey City. We started with a long list of possibilities and then narrowed it down by eliminating options that are highly unlikely to be feasible, like Hyperloop tunnels, for example, and by grouping some options together if they were very similar. And then for each mode or service, we evaluated the level of the technological maturity. So is it already widely used today? Is it being tested, or is it still a while off? Who are some of, are there vendors out there? Is there a competitive marketplace? Is this a pretty well-established industry, or is there some risk to it? And what are examples of it being used in Jersey City's peer cities? And what would be the use cases for it in Jersey City? What kinds of trips could it serve? What kinds of neighborhoods would it serve? What kinds of gaps could it address? So we developed an evaluation framework to further narrow down and prioritize these options. and use that framework to identify which options are best suited to address those key findings that I went over a couple of minutes ago from the existing conditions and the things that we heard from all of you. And more generally to assess their pros and cons, their feasibility, and to ultimately prioritize them for potential implementation, taking into account their different timeframes for adoption. So a few options rose to the top, followed closely by a second tier, and then some options kind of grouped together at the lower end of the scores. So the dark green rows here are those that were found to be most beneficial to address the gaps, policy goals, or what we heard through public feedback, and which also were seen as relatively feasible to implement. The lighter green rows are the second tier, so they were seen to be moderately impactful and moderately feasible, or maybe very impactful but not so feasible, or vice versa. And then the things that were maybe seen as less impactful or less feasible are the ones in white here at the bottom. That said, just because some of the options scored lower, I just want to mention that, it doesn't mean that they're not worth keeping an eye on or maybe even adopting through a pilot project if the opportunity were to present itself. It just means that based on the priorities and scoring that we identified through the process, we didn't see them as delivering quite as much bang for the buck. But obviously conditions on the ground can change, and also depending on the specifics of how you were to implement that motor technology, it could still be beneficial to the city. Okay, so moving on to the recommendations, drum roll. So the plan has two categories of recommendations, basically. We have those that are specific to individual transportation modes and technologies, and then we have more systematic recommendations that can help create more overarching structures that are needed to have what we're calling universal community mobility, which my colleague Evan will talk about in a moment. And I apologize, the pollen is killing me lately. Maybe you can relate. So I'll start with the recommendations by motor technology and then hand it over to Evan. Okay, so bus rapid transit is not a necessarily a new or innovative option per se, but it would be new to Jersey City. And it's a way of kind of, re-examining or enhancing an existing option. So throughout our public engagement, we heard that the highest priority improvements desired for bus service include shorter headways, in other words, the time between buses arriving, streets that are designed to move buses faster, more weekend and nighttime service, and clear information on bus routes, schedules, and fares. BRT has the potential to advance many of these types of improvements. The city did a BRT feasibility study in 2013 that identified Kennedy Boulevard corridor connecting from Bayonne to Journal Square as a priority location for the first phase of a BRT system, which serves New Jersey Transit routes number 10 and 119. And you can see here with the yellow and red and orange origin destination data that it really supports that finding. Also, other routes serving Journal Square Transportation Center that overlap some of those areas of the highest need from an equity standpoint could be other, potential future locations for BRT service. So BRT could include reducing the number of stops so that the buses can move faster versus local bus service. It can be expanding the length of the BRT stops so more than one bus can stop at the same time. It can be providing more customer amenities like seating, shelters, signage, bus maybe arrival time, real-time arrival, stuff like that. And so what we're recommending is a study to, really take this concept forward in terms of bus priority along this Kennedy Boulevard corridor. So with that, we want to do our first, we want to get your feedback on the first question here, which is, would having bus rapid transit along JFK Boulevard encourage you personally to ride the bus more frequently? So we'll take a couple of minutes here to let you respond. For those who maybe joined late, I'm not sure if you can see the link in the chat, so I'll put it in there again. We're using a website called Mentimeter. So you should just open that in a separate window and it should take you to the question we're on, or there's a button at the top of the screen that'll take you to the question we're on. And yeah, feel free to put your comments in the chat as well. Thank you, Nelda. I see a comment on BRT there. Great. Yeah, so I mean, I think the responses we're seeing so far make sense because, you know, I think BRT is helpful if you use the route, right? But if that particular route isn't the route that you really typically use, then obviously you're not going to be a beneficiary of it. So I see kind of a mix here of yes, definitely, somewhat, and also not really. Great. Well, I think you can keep responding if you're still working on it, but we can also move on to the next mode here. I guess we're doing okay on time, so I also want to make sure we don't rush through. But all right, so the next, and yeah, and feel free to keep adding comments in the chat too. So the next option here is what we call microtransit, which is basically, well, the city has the VIA system now, and that's the idea of microtransit, is basically smaller vehicles that are more demand responsive rather than traveling on fixed routes like a traditional bus. You know, where typically people would catch a ride either by kind of hailing it on their phone through an app, although there could be some fixed locations as well. So yeah, Jersey City has had an established on-demand microtransit service with VIA since 2020. The service is, based on what we've heard, has been seen as pretty successful. Between its opening in February 2020 and November 21, over 500,000 rides were completed. Average wait times were just under 19 minutes and just under 80% of rides were on time. And the service was expanded in September 2021 from 17 vehicles to 26. VIA's performance evaluation reports indicate that areas for improvement are, you know, bringing that wait time down a bit and generally improving on-time performance. So identifying ways to increase the number of passengers per ride would make the service more efficient and easier to scale up. So if we can find ways to, you know, either increase demand or have the service be maybe, you know, quicker to arrive, you know, then more people may use it, and then you end up with more people per vehicle, which makes it a more cost-effective service to operate, basically. Other limitations of the existing service include payment options and like I said, scalability. So currently booking does not require a smartphone, which is good. You can do it through a phone line, but it does require a bank account. So residents without a bank account can't really take advantage of the benefits of this program. Like I mentioned, the service is currently limited in scale due to the number of passengers riding per vehicle. One thing I do want to mention is that the city has provided discounted ride vouchers to the housing authority, and maybe that's a model, you know, that could be expanded to other lower income members of the general public. So you see here on the slide some of the specific recommendations: to increase the fleet size, add Sunday service, expand Saturday hours, expand late night service. Look into opportunities for reduced fares, like I mentioned, or to expand that really, and to work with neighboring communities to potentially extend service to surrounding employment centers outside of the city, maybe where Jersey City residents are looking to go, or even where folks who are coming to Jersey City are coming from. And that could drive up ridership too, which again can make the service more cost effective. So now we'll go to the next survey question. So do you feel that these recommendations around microtransit meet the need of Jersey City? And again, feel free to put, if you have specific thoughts, to put them in the chat. So we're, it looks like a strong sentiment that it meets some of the needs, but not all. And I see some specific suggestions in the chat for how it could meet more of those needs, such as senior citizen discount fares. Great. All right, why don't we go to the next one? And I assure you that all of the solutions are not more cars on the road. We'll get to some other options as well. All right, so as probably most of you know, City Bike's been serving Jersey City since 2015 and expanded into Hoboken in 2021, which is great for encouraging regional connectivity. As part of that expansion, the contract was also amended to allow for 15 more stations on top of the 35 original docks, but there's currently funding limitations that have held back significant system expansion, which highlights the need for supplemental funding sources for City Bike to help pay for expansion. The good news is that there are several federal funding programs that can now be used to fund micromobility infrastructure like this. So when we say micromobility, we mean things like bike share, scooter share, other sort of small modes for getting around. The federal infrastructure bill, either added programs or changed some existing funding programs to include things like paying for bike share. So that's good news, and something that we'll identify in the final plan as a specific next step to pursue that kind of funding. And our recommendation here is that future expansions of the City Bike system should focus on areas that see higher levels of biking and are areas of the highest need identified through our equity analysis. So this means expanding or densifying City Bike availability in these 3 neighborhoods. And specifically in the Heights, we'd like to see increased station density and expanding into the Western Slope. On the west side, we recommend expanding further west towards Route 440 and increasing station density south of Lincoln Park. And in Greenville, increasing density around New Jersey City University and expanding further south. And expanded bike share must be complemented by safe infrastructure. So I kind of mentioned this earlier in what we heard in our public engagement. A lot of community members noted general concerns about feeling safe biking on local streets, as well as specific locations on that map and in our previous public meetings, locations that are in need of bicycle infrastructure improvements. So you can see some of those on this map, the dark blue dots, in the Heights, Journal Square, and the West Side. And outside of physical infrastructure improvements, City Bike access options for those without bank accounts should be explored. So similar to what I mentioned for VIA. City Bike passes can currently be easily purchased without a smartphone. But again, if you don't have a bank account, then you can't. So we'd like to explore adding options for those without a bank account. And that would also increase, the pool of potential riders. So we'll go to the next question to get your feedback on this. Which of these goals related to City Bike and bike share do you think the city should prioritize if it has to choose? A lot of prioritizing expanding safe bike infrastructure. That's interesting. Even over system expansion to some extent. And that's a good point too, that the infrastructure also supports personal bike ownership, so not just bike share. Great. Okay. It looks like looks like we've gotten most responses at this point. Why don't we go to the next one? Okay, so autonomous vehicle or AV shuttles. So these kinds of services could provide an additional short trip option to complement existing transit service and present an opportunity to design service around the needs of key communities that aren't currently directly served by existing transit options. There's different ways that the city could go about this, but either way, it should be designed to again to target areas of the highest need, to provide more concentrated short trip service than is currently provided by VIA or New Jersey Transit buses. But what we would want to make sure is that, I mean, there's already a lot of options in Jersey City, right? And the more options there are, it can be kind of overwhelming. And we don't want to just, sort of rob Peter to pay Paul. Is that it? Right. So we don't want to siphon riders from one option and make it less viable. So really we think this is something that could be targeted. And again, one way to do it would be to do it in an area that's not already well served by an existing option. Maybe an even more interesting option would be to work with the existing Jitney buses to kind of modernize and enhance their services. And this is something we discussed at the January meetings, that there is a group of there is a segment of the population that does rely on those Jitney buses, but those who don't really, it's sort of a mystery, right? What are those services? Where do they go? How would you get information on them? You kind of have to know. So maybe there's an opportunity here, again, maybe with the federal funding that's out there, to look at autonomous vehicles as part of Jitney bus service. And why would you do that? Well, basically, it lets you run the service at much lower cost. So it would let you either run more service or reduce the cost, or both. So these are kind of the options we see. It's notable that Trenton is the first city in New Jersey to start advancing an autonomous vehicle shuttle pilot project. And they released a request for expressions of interest in December. Submissions were due in February. So we recommend keeping a close eye on what they decide to do. They also received a $5 million New Jersey Department of Transportation Local Transportation Project Fund grant. So that's also a potential funding source for Jersey City if we were to decide to do something like this. So our recommendation here is basically to start laying the groundwork for something like this, to convene stakeholders and program partners, just to start understanding what this type of service could look like and which of these types of pathways for implementation might make sense, if it makes sense at all, and to keep an eye on what Trenton's doing, and any lessons learned there. So those are our recommendations on this topic. And let's get your feedback on that. So this is more of an open-ended question. Would you be comfortable using an autonomous vehicle shuttle system if it was a convenient option? Why or why not? So would you be okay with driverless vehicles? And if you can, it'd be great to put your response in the Mentimeter, but you're also welcome to elaborate on it in the chat. I love the variety of comments here. I think there's some concerns, just want to make sure it's safe. I'd like to see more real world implementation. Some folks suggested it should run along fixed routes. Yeah, it looks like there's kind of a range of comfort levels in terms of, would this be safer than humans? Great. Yeah, and there's definitely some differences of opinion in terms of, should the focus be on new options versus let's just kind of figure out how to improve the options that are already out there. Although there's again, there's maybe a synergy here with the existing jitney buses and services like that. Okay. I'm just going to clear these. There we go. All right. So next up is what we call mobility hubs. And it's just kind of a term for locations or infrastructure that bring different transportation modes together, usually at some kind of a, either a neighborhood kind of downtown area hub or, mixed use. By basically you're co-locating different options together, hopefully also with supportive land uses. And really what these can do is connect Jersey City's existing and potential future modes of transportation to create a more seamless and legible system for users. They don't require substantial technological or regulatory changes, just basically going out and taking some space and putting in some basic infrastructure. And they also have the potential to engage community groups and create employment opportunities even around oversight and maintenance. For example, Minneapolis has a Mobility Hubs pilot program that provides community-based paid ambassador roles to basically help take care of these. So we could see Jersey City implementing mobility hubs on a case-by-case basis as opportunities arise, either using public funds like grants at priority locations, or in partnership with existing entities like New Jersey Transit, for example, to improve Journal Square or Port Authority, or through a more formal public-private partnership type approach. There's kind of two categories of priority locations that we found. There's locations where existing rail stations overlap with high concentrations of underrepresented communities. And those are basically the first four that you see here: Journal Square, Newport Path Station, Garfield Avenue Light Rail, Danforth Avenue Light Rail. And there's priority locations in areas that were categorized as transit deserts and have a concentration of underrepresented communities. And that's numbers 5 to 8 here: Kennedy Boulevard around Communipaw and Grant, West Side Avenue in Kensington by the Lincoln Park entrance, where there's an existing city bike dock, Bergen Avenue and Jewett Avenue, where there's a city bike dock, and Central Avenue between Thorne and Congress, or by Washington Park. So these are some of the areas that we think should be prioritized for potential mobility hubs. Now we'd love to get your feedback. Oh, I'm sorry. I want to talk about a mobility as a service first, right? Because it kind of goes together. So basically, mobility hubs provide physical integration between different modes, like I said, and mobility as a service essentially provides technological integration. So it just basically means, creating systems to trying to close these annotations. So creating systems to integrate trip planning, trip booking, fare payment, and all the other customer service, all the different elements of different transportation modes, so that it basically becomes a seamless system. So mobility hubs and mobility as a service can work together to kind of strengthen each other and create both physically and in terms of the back end technology, a seamless system. That said, mobility as a service would probably take a little longer to implement because you have to work with a whole bunch of different transportation agencies and providers, public and private, and integrate their systems and things like that. But there's a great example out there in Pittsburgh called Move PGH, which is both a mobility hub and mobility as a service pilot program that was launched in 2021. And that program takes a comprehensive approach to integrating transportation options and serves as one of the first real world demonstrations of mobility as a service in the United States. Looking ahead, Jersey City should plan to coordinate and expand the mobility hubs and mobility as a service systems with neighboring communities to incorporate their services and integrate with their trip planning, booking, and payment platforms. So for example, the MTA in the New York City region is rolling out what it calls its Omni OMNY contactless fare payment system. So in addition to replacing the MetroCard, it's also going to create a platform to over time, allow for the integration of a range of different modes and payment options across the region. And Port Authority plans to introduce a similar tap and go payment option for PATH in 2023. So could these two systems be integrated? Could City Bike be integrated with them or VIA? So really the first immediate step is to figure out who those relevant stakeholders are and start to bring them together to look at data management, look at how to integrate their different systems, and develop kind of the overall goals and framework for a mobility as a service program. All right, now we will turn it to you all to let us know if you agree, disagree, or feel neutral about mobility hubs and creating a foundation for mobility as a service. I'll give you a few minutes to respond. Yeah, that's a fair point that they could be two separate questions. If you have, again, specific comments on one or the other, feel free to drop them in the chat. Great. Okay, so it looks like we have support in general, or maybe neutrality overall, but that a lot of it really would come down to the specifics. And I think there's some fair points about, yeah, this would be great, but is it really realistic, or is it realistic in the near term? And something I should mention is that the final plan, it will have recommendations that are kind of phased over time, right? So something like things that could be done in the near term with the existing options that are already out there in Jersey City, those could be prioritized, and then, but we don't want to lose sight of maybe bigger moves where we need to create the foundation now so that it could be implemented later on. So it doesn't have to be an either or. It could be, both and some might be in the nearer term and some may be in the longer term. All right. So those were all of the recommendations specific to individual transportation modes or technologies or infrastructure. Now I would like to turn it over to Evan from Nelson Nygaard to talk through some of our more overarching systematic recommendations. Evan?
Great, thank you, Mike. And before we get started into the next slide, just want to level set on what we mean by systematic recommendations. What we mean is really, these are the program features and even the partnerships that are going to support the use of current and future mobility services. And I just want to make it clear that a lot of these recommendations are really focusing on the specific needs of the folks that we identified living in transit deserts and environmental justice communities. These recommendations focus a lot less on what specifically is going to move you, and those are really the modes that Mike just discussed, and more on how we're going to remove the barriers to gain access to those transportation options and make the rider experience much more easy and simple, no matter where you live, where you're from, or even where what your background is. So if you can go to the next slide. So the core component of our systematic recommendations focuses on a concept that we're calling universal community mobility. And this goes far beyond investing in the new transportation modes that we've been discussing earlier in the presentation. Universal community mobility is our organizing framework to ensure that people living in transit deserts and environmental justice communities have concentrated investment in mobility services that are actually designed for their specific needs and how they want to move around. This represents programs, investments, and even policies to ensure that there's a basic level of access, safety, reliability, and affordability when you're trying to get around Jersey City. And so the way that we're articulating universal community mobility, it's actually around 6 different types of investment areas or categories. And we're starting out by just talking about the basic mix of mobility options. And these are what we're calling the recommended set of modes and mobility options that Mike just presented to you. But it also includes supporting these options with differential pricing and subsidies, and even prepaid mobility, so that those with highest need can gain access financially to those new mobility options, and really make this more of a public mobility system and not multiple tiers of mobility systems. The second recommendation is around establishing one-stop shop customer tools, like payment options for the unbanked, centralized booking for all your transportation options all in one app, centralizing customer service in one location digitally. And these features are intended to reduce the friction when booking your transportation options. And it's intended to actually help you make more informed travel decisions based on whatever your means are, time of day, comfort level, and where you want to go. Next, we are recommending creating new payment solutions like mobility wallets that really work like monthly debit accounts that can be used on a range of different transportation options. You might consider that similar to subscription-based services like Netflix. That is, in theory, like a television wallet. There's also fare capping that sets a maximum daily fare that you spend on regardless of the number of trips that you take, as well as fare integration across different types of transit options. We're also recommending thinking about new ways to address policing on transit and in public spaces like mobility hubs, thinking about how to leverage community partnerships to create safer and more comfortable transportation spaces. And then going beyond how you move, we want to think more about how you invest, you as in the transportation services and transportation industry is actually investing in community. by building out workforce development opportunities related to those innovative transportation solutions that are going to be entering into your city. This might include creating job opportunities for people that are living in Jersey City, things like local hire requirements, even job training in the mobility trades. Mike actually gave a really good example of the Minneapolis Ambassador Program at Mobility Hubs. I think that's just a really great example of what this could look like. But it could also include jobs and training for things like transportation operations, maintenance, customer service, and other types of jobs. And then finally, we think that consistent language access for people accessing mobility options is really critical, and just making sure that no matter what option you're looking for, you have the same language assistance options available to you. That includes languages that are on signs, on maps, and even in the apps that you're using to actually book your transportation. So this in a nutshell is universal community mobility. There's a lot of components there. And it's not that we are saying that you should be prioritizing one of the program features over another, but we would love to hear more about what are the program features that are resonating most with you. If it was a matter of phasing things in, what would you prioritize in terms of phasing? So we'd love to get a sense from you, which elements are the highest priority for you as it relates to universal community mobility. Payment support is coming up, identifying ways to make it a lot more affordable but easier to pay. New ways to generate safer transportation options, and that's starting to come up as a priority. So it seems like there is some interest in really making this more than getting around and potentially building community wealth through transportation, which is great. Customer support has some support or some level of priority, but looks like not as much as safety and equitable payments.
Now, throughout the day, the students and teachers also went through their active shooter safety protocol.
Right. I'll give it a few more seconds. I think Deborah says all of them. Fantastic. Okay. All right, so it looks like safety comes up on top as the highest priority. Equitable payments is next, followed by workforce development and customer support. Not that language assistance is not a priority, it just isn't the highest priority relative to the other elements of universal community mobility.
All right, thanks, Evan. So, so those are our recommendations. I think next I'll turn it back to Eli to discuss next steps, and then I think we'll open it up for more of a open Q&A, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, thank you all for participating. It's been a really active chat, which has been fantastic, and really great participation in these questions. So for next steps, as I kind of previously mentioned, we're still in the development of the final report. So, the comments and feedback that we received today will be integrated into that final report, and it will be released around the end of June, and will be added to the project website. So if you have any additional comments or questions or feedback that you weren't able to get into tonight, or if you have later, you're welcome to go to the JC on the Move website, which you can go through that URL, or you can use, or you can get to via the QR code there. Feel free to submit anything there, or pass it along to someone else who may not have been able to join tonight and they have comments or feedback they want to provide. And again, we'll also post additional materials to the website, as we finalize them in the coming month. So as Mike mentioned, we're going to transition into the question and answer phase. So I want to give you the opportunity to kind of open floor and kind of address some of the things that may have come up through the presentation. So we're going to handle this through Mentimeter again. So you'll have the opportunity to put your questions or submit your questions through the website, and that'll pop up here, and we'll kind of go through them. And you know, as long as we'll try to get through as many as we can.
And while we wait for some of them to show up on here, we do have a couple that are popping up in the chat. If we want to focus on those ones while we wait, we can. We have one that says, how much funding is available for implementation?
So I think that comes down to depending on the program. So you know, with the federal money that's come out, there's definitely an increase in funding, and you know, when you have studies such as this and some of the previous work we've done, that makes us eligible for a lot of funding. So you know, we're actively looking for opportunities to you know, apply for funding to you know, get some of these high priority projects that we've come up with over the past few years.
Okay, now there are a few on the slide.
Okay. So the first one I see is, if approved, when would the BRT on JFK be implemented? So this would, you know, be kind of a longer term vision that would take, you know, understandably cooperation between the city, the county, and NJ Transit. However, you know, there have been previous conversations with these entities. So a longer term vision, but something that, you know, we've heard through at least this study, and some of our other feedback is, you know, high priority for the city, and something that, you know, we're actively pursuing. Great. So what is the timeline from the report being released and some of these suggestions being implemented? So you'll see in the final report, we have it outlined by essentially the timeline for, you know, short-term, long-term, and medium-term implement our recommendations. So in the short term, we'll be able to, you know, hit on a bunch of these that were brought up tonight. In the report, it'll go into, you know, more in depth. However, we specifically made sure this report had very actionable items within it, so that we're able to, you know, hit the ground running on, you know, many of the things that you've heard about tonight. So this again is about BRT. So again, one of the reasons, you know, we wanted to have this study, and we've been doing a lot of, you know, additional outreach, is to build momentum, you know, towards this, you know, advancing a BRT system. As you mentioned, you know, there were, you know, it takes a lot of actors, you know, to kind of get everyone together to implement it. So it's not an easy solution. It takes a lot of coordination, but, you know, when you have the backing of the community as well as the data, it, you know, helps us make a good case for why this system is needed, especially with the rapid growth of Jersey City over the, you know, past decade and the continued rapid growth. So yeah, we've seen many plans from the city, but very little action. Ward C has no meaningful bike infrastructure. So how do we overcome that? So we have, you know, over the past few years, put out a few plans. Now that we've, you know, we have essentially more funding available to us, and, you know, a larger staff available to us. So over the past few years, we've been, you know, rolling out a fair number of these recommendations from there, either from the Bike Master Plan, from our Vision Zero plan, or from the parking plan. A lot of these are, you know, longer term visions that take a lot of work and coordination and funding. However, you know, especially with more funding available, we'll be able to take more on, and, you know,
I think I don't know, you were cutting out a little bit there, Eli, but I think we got that. You know, I will say, like a lot of cities, Jersey City, there's limited resources, right? So I do agree that these plans, they're important because they provide that foundation about where to focus and where to put limited resources. I do think that, like Eli said, when there's more of a groundswell of community support, that makes it easier. So, I've definitely seen that in other cities as well. But funding is going to be a really important piece of it, to be honest. So I do think a big part of moving this plan forward will be identifying what those potential funding sources are that the city can leverage.
So how will the city move forward from plans to concrete action? We've seen community members expend energy and bike master plan, climate plan, parking plan with little progress to show. So as I mentioned, we specifically kind of tailored this plan to have very actionable steps for the reasons that we can, try to rapidly roll some of these out. Over the past few years, we have, moved forward a fair number of, recommendations from these plans, and again, a lot of it's just funding and kind of identifying priorities. So one of the great things through the studies, we're able to help identify priorities. Where we should expend some of this funding and staff time first. So path train schedules need to be improved. Late night service is awful, and the weekend service forces people who are trying to get to New York City to sit in Hoboken and return to JC through Hoboken. So I think one of the great things that came out of the studies, we were able to identify how many people travel outside of the traditional service hours that are provided through either PATH or NJ Transit. So with this data, we're able to kind of make an argument and also help elevate these concerns to these entities. As we don't control them, or but we have relationships with these entities. So this helps us make a good case. Bike infrastructure, there's already a bike master plan. How will this study support moving that forward? A protected bike lane from the Heights to Greenbelt has been a part of that plan. So as Mike showed on one of our earlier slides, we were able to map the origin and destinations of biking throughout the city. So we're able to kind of match that up as well as go along with the feedback we've received. So that kind of helps advance, or at least helps us contextualize some of the, demand for additional bike infrastructure could be located, and also some of the bike infrastructure should be co-located with expanded city bike stations. So I think those two kind of go hand in hand in improving our bike infrastructure overall. So how do we encourage state police to enforce traffic laws on their roads? That is a good question. We are actively, engaging with the state on, state roads and, how we can make them safer and essentially encourage complete street, ideas. With it being out of our jurisdiction, it's challenging, but, there are ongoing conversations with, state and county entities, how we can better coordinate and make all these facilities safer, despite some of them being rather large projects and being tricky coordination. So we need board seat bike lanes. Newark Avenue bike infrastructure suddenly stops the border of Ward C. So we're constantly looking at different ways to incorporate bike infrastructure in Ward C. We know it's kind of tricky with the development going on and with the public transit infrastructure. However, we are actively looking at ways that we can provide critical links that have been identified through this group and through other studies that north-south corridors needed, and we found that in the data that we need ways to link people to Journal Square, whether that be from the Heights or from Greenbelt. So are there any plans for Route 440? We need more buses stopping by 440 for workers and residents. So this kind of goes back to what I was saying earlier, that we are having active conversations with NJDOT about this. So this is, a critical concern for us when it comes to the Bayfront development, and also the rapid growth along 440 with lots of residential development coming on there. So we have, initial studies going on, about how we can make this a complete street to encourage, mixed use development as well as increasing safety. So this is something that's been an ongoing effort for the city, and just requires coordination with the state, which can be challenging when you're working with different entities. So has JC already spoken to scooter share companies? Other cities like Denver and DC are way ahead of this. So it's something we're exploring and something we've explored through this study. So it wasn't ranked as high as some of the other modes due to some safety concerns, which we also heard, through our other public meetings. However, that's something we're actively exploring as a kind of an alternative way to match people up with whether it be bus stops or light rail stops or community facilities in downtown districts. So it's something we're actively exploring, but we haven't released anything yet. So we included we looked at car share. However, it did not score as high. I don't know if Mike, you can talk about that.
Yeah, I can jump in. Yep. So car share scored well, for the benefits that it can provide, but we didn't see it addressing the immediate gaps because it's not really as practical an option for shorter trips or for daily commutes. So, we think that it can be very useful, but it may not address kind of the specific needs that we heard were a priority. I think the other reason, I can also look at the specific scores, but I think the other reason was just that, it's not as helpful an option for lower income users, at least not as it's currently typically set up. So, it wasn't that there was a feasibility issue or anything like that. It wasn't that we heard negative feedback from the public. It was more just that it didn't feel like it was the tool that addressed the specific challenges that we heard about, which was more for either short trips or kind of daily commute rather than occasional trips.
So how is Mayor Fulop engaging with this? Will feedback be relayed that he needs to do more to advocate with the county and state? So as a part of our technical advisory committee, we've included multiple departments, including the mayor's office on that committee. So, we've, essentially these concerns and feedback have been relayed essentially, throughout the city, throughout all the departments, trying to get a comprehensive look at, how we can best get these recommendations implemented. Yeah. So are you considering to charge commuters that travel JC to New York City taxes similar to what New York City is doing? I'm assuming this is talking about congestion pricing. That was not something that was looked at through this study. So I think, we kind of touched on car share already. Okay, so bike riders on sidewalks create dangerous situation for pedestrians. How can that be addressed? So I think it's been touched on a little bit already. That I saw some comments in the chat. I think made a good point that when you build that building safe bike infrastructure can help reduce that conflict point where will feel safe using the infrastructure. And it's also been identified by this group that safe bike infrastructure is a kind of a key priority to building out our bike network and making a feasible option throughout the city. So are you planning a bike lane on 139 upper level? No, we are not. That is a state road. However, we do have, we're looking at opportunities that, mirror 139. So there are feasible alternatives to providing that east-west connection that's similar. However, we are looking at ways that, encourage, we're looking at ways that, encourage, not through this study, but through other efforts to enhance safety along 139, because we know it can be a bit dangerous for a pedestrian or bicyclist trying to cross.
Yeah, I was just going to mention, Eli, that it might be worth, mentioning that the city has a Vision Zero plan, which addresses a lot of these more general kind of safety concerns, whereas this study was really looking at how to fill specific gaps in the mobility network, just for what that's worth.
So will this study address the proposed turnpike extension widening? Studies show widening efforts are counterproductive. So no, this study did not look at the turnpike extension widening. So congestion traffic taxes could possibly reduce traffic and finance alternative transportation, especially for people who have low income. So yeah, again, this wasn't specifically looked at in this study. However, this is certainly something that is of interest to the community. That's something that we can mark down for further investigation, because we do know that congestion taxing and cordon pricing have powerful effects on reducing congestion in certain areas when it's set up correctly. So bike parking, I ride all over the city and often found looking for a proper rack. Can we consider that in hub developments? Yeah, so that's certainly one of the key elements of a mobility hub. Would be including or co-locating these types of facilities so that you could ride a bike and lock it up securely. So as a part of our rollout or our agreement with UNI, essentially that'll kind of serve as the basis for how we can start to think about mobility hubs throughout the city, because those will provide secure bike parking. Can we, for the record, know which elected? So I think, yeah, that'd just be, you have to look through the participants list. So on JFK, would a redesign to incorporate BRT lanes be necessary? I don't know, Mike, if your team looked at those specific options, or because I know we had looked at I think a few different alternatives just in terms of there's the option for dedicated BRT lanes and also bus priority investments.
Yeah, I mean, you got to approach each project kind of on a case by case basis and look at all the conditions, like how many buses are running, how often, what's the, car traffic, how much space do you have to work with? Is there enough space on the sidewalks? Do you need space for bike lanes? And really just try to balance all of those, and there's ways to prioritize buses. Bus lanes are obviously a great way to do that. But you can also prioritize buses in other ways. You can have the sidewalk widen out at the bus stop so the buses don't have to pull out of traffic, which can help them move faster, because then they don't have to spend time pulling out and trying to get back into traffic. You can have traffic signals that let the buses go first. Basically, if the buses are in kind of a separate, like, little lane at the intersections, they can get a signal before the rest of traffic. Another way is to have transit signal priority, where the buses can actually make the traffic signals stay green longer so they can get through the light, or turn green sooner if they get stopped at a red light. So, there's a whole toolbox, and I mean, you need to do a little bit more of a detailed study to figure out exactly what's the right fit for JFK Boulevard and how you balance the transit priority with other needs, like for biking or for pedestrians.
Route 39 is dangerous to pedestrians crossing, has no access for bicyclists, and only serves to move commuters into the tunnel. It separates Journal Square, the Heights communities. So yeah, we kind of touched on this before. This is, a common thread we've heard. We are, actively advocating for, complete street improvements to there to, improve safety and comfort for pedestrians and bicyclists, because we know it can be a real impediment. Yeah. So we need lampposts with brighter lights and all JC. So yeah, I think this is a good. I think this is a good suggestion. I mean, brighter lights can help improve safety, and if there's specific areas that you think can use better lighting, you can always submit requests to the city through the public app, and yeah, we can make improvements through that. So why won't anyone talk about streetcars? JC used to have a glorious streetcar network. I don't believe that was in our full recommendations. I don't know, Mike, you can speak to streetcars versus BRT or.
Yeah, I mean, that's true. We didn't look at streetcars specifically as a new option. I guess we were thinking, between light rail and the bus system, that kind of is sort of a stand-in for streetcars. But it'd be a very big effort, right? You'd have to figure out who's going to run it. Is New Jersey Transit going to run it, or the city or someone else? It's an interesting idea. I love streetcars personally.
So is designating certain roads as bus only considered? New York City did this with 14th Street, Manhattan, and saw incredible results.
It kind of falls under BRT. I think, we call it BRT, but really it was more of a catch-all category for any kind of transit priority treatments. Maybe we'll adjust that for the final report just so it's a little clearer. It doesn't have to be what you consider traditional BRT as much as transit priority, right? And one way to do that, like you said, is having bus only, or what's sometimes called transit ways. Actually, 14th Street, it's not bus only exactly. Basically, local traffic can still access it to make deliveries or do pickup and drop off of passengers, but you have to turn at the next light. So it's not a through street, basically, right? And that reduces traffic quite a bit. And I think that actually, that type of idea does hold a lot of promise. You'd have to see which routes in Jersey City would make sense. Probably higher ridership, higher bus traffic routes, but it's a good idea.
So is a bike path possible along 139? I think there are some just complications with right-of-way ownership, but this seems to be a common thread through this study. So, or through tonight, so it's something we can definitely mark down for further investigation as we're advocating for these improvements along that corridor. So we need for New Jersey Transit train to have a platform at Journal Square. The NJ Transit train passes directly under the Journal Square path station. So I know New Jersey Transit going into Hoboken passes a little bit further north of Square. However, there's always opportunities for better connections, to New Jersey Transit between New Jersey Transit and PATH. So was the gondola concept thrown out? Could work in the Heights in Hoboken. So I don't know if Mike, you want to speak just to the, scoring of tramways?
Yeah, I mean, we saw a lot of positives. The reason it didn't make kind of the short list was, obviously it only serves very specific connections. That's, number one. It's only going to get you from really point A to point B, or maybe point A to point B to point C. The other reason is feasibility. Honestly, you need to find the land to put the stations. There's a lot of interesting legal issues around kind of, the air rights and where it would go and liability concerns. Obviously, you also like streetcars. It's a new mode in Jersey City, new in a way that you need to understand, what's the business model, who would operate it. So, again, as we said earlier, just because something didn't make kind of the shorter list, you'll see in the final plan, that it doesn't mean they're off the table. I personally think gondolas actually do hold a lot of promise. We've seen them used in some cities to serve hilly neighborhoods or lower income neighborhoods and help get people to the central business district. So it wasn't thrown out, but it just wasn't seen as being as feasible in the near to midterm.
Can we create interconnectivity for Journal Square residents to the light rail? I'm not entirely sure what this is referring to. It just means expanding light rail to Journal Square. However, I think some of the other recommendations, such as the BRT, would help connect. It would serve some of these purposes. Is there a way to advocate for transit to recreational areas? So locally with city bike stations at Lydia State Park, or further away with transit that connects to hikes, larger state parks. So within the city's control, city bike stations, that's something we can advocate for. As Mike mentioned, we have a desire to expand the system. However, there are financial constraints. However, with the expanded federal funding, there's the opportunity to add more stations. And as we found through the study, accessing areas such as Lincoln Park as well as Liberty State Park were challenging areas not well served by the existing network. So that's something that could be explored and accomplished with adding city bike stations in these areas. Can you please prioritize streetcars as recommendations? So yeah, we're not anti-streetcar. It just wasn't something that was initially brought up in this study. However, bus rapid transit, accomplishes many of the things that streetcars do. It just usually comes down to, kind of the investment level where, streetcars are not, BRT is seen as just, attainable thing that, the city could invest in the relative near future. Could we create a shuttle that connects parks to particular areas in zones with? So I think this is something that some of the existing, modes kind of can help with, such as like microtransit, potentially AV shuttles in the future, as well as bike share. So yeah, we've identified in our master plan that connecting people to open space and parks is a priority for the city and something that needs to be done better, as we found that there's a lack of connections to some of our larger park facilities. So this is something that we can look to invest in and make an effort to connect people with these areas. Some more traffic lights. So I'd say, some of the recommendations to the street lights, you can put in locations that you feel would warrant a traffic light, and we can do traffic studies. And the city has responded to these. So I think this is a repeat from before. So how can we advocate for automatic traffic enforcement? So that's something you can advocate with your local officials, with your council people or state legislators for these efforts. It's something that had to go through the state for authorization. You do a citywide survey to see if the investment into streetcars is something that would be okay with. I mean, again, this is something that it seems to be popping up quite a bit. So, we can certainly factored into our future engagement. With this study and future studies, we're always looking to engage on priorities of residents in the city. Connectivity between parks, not connectivity to parks. Some parks are passive, other recreational, some city, some county. Yeah, so I do think some of the recommendations that we've made within the study and these investments will help alleviate these issues of connectivity between the parks. Another repeat.
We may have reached the end.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I think that's what that means. Oh, here's
Well,
one.
There was a question, Sam, what the Mentimeter code is. I was trying to find it to put it in the chat again,
Oh,
if you have it handy.
that I can find.
So yeah, I think this is a great question about better pedestrian scale lighting citywide. We have lots of utility poles that shine the street. I believe sidewalks dark. As we are rolling out complete street efforts through many of our investment projects, this is something we're looking at. This is definitely an important safety concern. And again, if there's certain locations that you think would benefit from this, certainly send that our way. We're always looking for opportunities to increase safety, and this is an important one. So is there a breakdown for how many residents from each ward in the city participated in the study? So we have the overall numbers from each public meeting. We didn't ask by ward. However, the public survey we did break it down by ward. And that will be included in one of the appendices for the final report.
Okay, now I think that's the end again.
Okay, we got through a bunch there. I think 2 more popped up. Do we have leverage? How can we get action from them? So we have been, actively engaging with them. I think 2 years ago they released their, expansion plan for how they're going to, help address overcrowding issues at their stations. We've been working with them on, issues of access and capacity. We have an active partnership with the Port Authority. When it comes to path, and we also have active conversations with them when it comes to the Holland tunnels as well, when it comes to the improvements they're making to the entrances there. We advocate for our positions, and when we have studies like this with public feedback and public data, we can make a really compelling case as to what improvements we want to see and why we want to see them. So street projects are done in Jersey City. They're done by engineers, including streetscapes, no urban design, no landscape. So within the new projects that we're doing, we try to incorporate as much urban design as we can. Sometimes we're constrained just by some of the programs they're in. However, we have a multidisciplinary team with people with an urban design background. So we're pushing for these elements to include greenery, and certain streetscaping elements.
I see in the chat, Adam asked how we're factoring in cost. So we did, yeah, it's true. We didn't include it in what we presented today, but we did consider relative costs both for capital implementation for building it or for operating and maintaining it. So that was definitely one of the factors we considered when thinking about feasibility. And so the things that we're kind of recommending that the city prioritize are things, that either don't cost much or have a high kind of benefit to cost, ratio. We didn't develop detailed cost estimates, but it was sort of based on the relative cost. Just wanted to answer that one.
Great, thanks, Mike. So again, just kind of talking about having a multidisciplinary team. So again, we advocate for streetscaping, complete street principles and urban design principles within our streetscaping projects. We try to incorporate the best we can with all the comments to try to get trees, greenery, seating, and certain elements like that. So trees, native plants, and habitat need to be added to traffic calming measures. I think this is a great point. We're certainly trying to incorporate as much greenery as possible to reduce urban heat island effect impacts, as well as areas with poor drainage and that experience a lot of flooding. We're trying to incorporate these areas there and working with the SIDs around the city to help maintain these so that they're attractive looking, but also serve a functional purpose. Are there any talk of pedestrian tunnels through the Holland Tunnel or with the Holland Tunnel? I don't believe so. I know there have been some higher level pedestrian access projects talked about recently, but this is not one I'm familiar with. And it looks like we're back to the first one. All right. Looks like action in the chat has slowed down. And here's one. Okay. So I think that might be it. Oh, I see another one popped up. What are the higher level talks on pedestrian traffic to New York City? So those were, I was just referencing, there have been some, I guess, high level studies that have come out, or just concepts of pedestrian bridges between New Jersey and between the boroughs that are just high level concepts that come out over the past few years. But again, not a part of the study. All right, I think that's a good ending point. Oh, so we got another one pop up, sneaking them in. All right, streetcars, thanks. Okay, heard you loud and clear. Thank you. So again, we really want to thank you all for taking the time to come out and join us tonight. The conversation was robust, and we really appreciate the feedback. So everything we had will be compiled and will be brought into the final report. So we thank you for those who joined tonight, and as well as the other studies and throughout our engagement throughout the study. So just be on the lookout for the final report, which should be coming out and be posted on the project website by the end of June. And again, if you have any additional comments, feedback, or questions, feel free to submit them on the project website. You can go to the URL there or use the QR code. And feel free to share that link with anyone you may know who's wanted to make it tonight, wasn't able to. And this recording will also be posted on the website, so you're welcome to share that as well. So again, thank you all for your time, and everyone have a great night.